It was 14 degrees in the Ridgewood Estates subdivision outside Charlotte, with a wind chill closer to -5. Every house on Maple Crescent sat dark and freezing, ice-covered power lines sagging across the street. Every house except one. But it was not actually a house. It was a wooden shed at the far edge of the cul-de-sac with smoke curling from a metal chimney pipe. And the woman inside was the same woman the neighborhood had spent 8 months trying to get rid of. To understand how she got there, you need to go back 8 months earlier. Denise Carter was 41 years old and black, a detail that mattered more to her neighbors than any of them would have admitted out loud. She had spent 6 years in the United States Army as a combat engineer, a job that sounds made up until you see what it actually involves. Combat engineers build things in places where nothing should be built. Forward operating bases in the Afghan desert, temporary bridges over rivers in Iraq, field hospitals out of plywood, and tarps while mortars are landing a quarter-mile away. She was good at it. 2 deployments, a handful of commendations, and an honorable discharge in 2016. The kind of service record you would think guarantees a stable life back home, but the transition from military to civilian life crushed her. That is not an exaggeration. Within 18 months of coming home to North Carolina, Denise lost her warehouse job to a round of layoffs, burned through her savings paying medical bills from a knee injury she got overseas, and fell behind on rent. Her family was scattered. Her mother had passed while she was deployed. Her sister lived 3 states away and was barely getting by herself. There was no safety net waiting for Denise, and by the spring of 2023, she was living out of her car in a Walmart parking lot outside of Charlotte. When the car broke down and she could not afford to fix it, she bought a 2-person tent from a thrift store for $11 and started looking for somewhere to set it up. That somewhere turned out to be an empty quarter-acre lot at the edge of Ridgewood Estates, a cookie-cutter subdivision where homes started around $400,000. The lot had been sitting vacant for years, tangled with weeds and forgotten by whatever developer had originally planned to build on it. Denise pitched her tent behind a cluster of overgrown bushes and tried to stay invisible. That lasted about 3 days. The first person to notice was a woman named Sharon, who lived in the house directly across the street. Sharon spotted the tent from her kitchen window and immediately posted about it in the neighborhood Facebook group. Within hours, the thread had over 60 comments. Words like eyesore, safety concern, and property values popped up again and again. Someone called the police that same evening. 2 officers showed up in a patrol car, talked to Denise for about 20 minutes, and left. They told her the lot was unzoned private land with no trespassing signs, and since no property owner had filed a complaint, there was nothing they could do. Denise was not breaking any laws. That did not satisfy the neighbors. Not even close. Over the next few weeks, complaints kept rolling in. Calls to code enforcement at the county building, letters to the Homeowners Association Board, even though the vacant lot was technically outside the Homeowners Association boundary. A petition circulated on a clipboard at the neighborhood 4th of July block party. The petition had 37 signatures by the end of the night, and Denise knew about all of it. She could hear the whispers when she walked to the gas station on the corner to fill her water jugs. She saw the looks. One afternoon, a man in a silver pickup truck slowed down, rolled his window halfway, and told her to go find a shelter downtown where she belonged. She did not respond. She just kept walking with her water jugs back to the tent. But something was shifting inside Denise during those early weeks. Every night in that tent, the temperature dropped and the ground got harder, and she could feel fall approaching like a deadline. She had survived worse conditions overseas, but she had also been younger then, and she had supply chains behind her. Now, she had nothing. And she knew that a tent would not survive a Carolina winter. So she started planning, quietly, the way she used to plan field constructions in the Army. She would walk around the lot, studying the drainage, noting where the wind hit hardest, measuring distances with her boot steps. She moved slowly and methodically, studying the drainage and the lay of the land. By mid-August, she had dragged home a stack of wooden pallets from behind a strip mall loading dock about 2 miles down the road. The stack of pallets would become the floor of what she was building. That was when the real mockery started. Sharon took a photo from her kitchen window and posted a caption that read, "Now she is building a fort," followed by 3 laughing emojis. The comments were brutal. People on Facebook joked about calling the city to condemn it. One person suggested it would blow over in the first storm. Someone else said the whole thing was an embarrassment to the neighborhood. Denise did not have social media. She did not see any of those posts. But she felt the hostility every single day, in the stares, in the way people would cross to the other side of the road when she walked by, in the fact that not one person in 8 months had knocked on her tent flap and asked if she needed a glass of water. She did not let it stop her. Over the following weeks, Denise gathered materials the way a squirrel gathers acorns before winter. Scrap lumber from construction site dumpsters, a box of mismatched nails from a church donation bin, sheets of corrugated metal roofing that someone left at the curb on trash day. She found a roll of Tyvek house wrap that still had about 40 feet left on it, and she carried it back on her shoulders like a rucksack. She gathered what she needed. This is where Denise's military training kicked in hard. She did not just nail boards together randomly. She dug down 6 inches into the dirt to create a level foundation pad, packed it tight with a borrowed tamper, and laid pallets flat as a raised floor platform to keep the structure off the wet ground. That is textbook field engineering. Moisture underneath a structure in cold weather is what kills you. It pulls heat out of the floor faster than the cold air pulls it through the walls. She framed the walls of her small shelter using 2x4s she had scavenged, bracing the corners with diagonal supports so the whole thing would not rack in the wind. The walls were double-layered with outer boards, then a gap stuffed with shredded newspaper and old sleeping bags she got from a donation drive at a Methodist church, then inner boards. Improvised insulation. Ugly, but functional. But the build did not go smoothly. A rainstorm in early September soaked the newspaper insulation before Denise had the outer wallboards up, and she had to tear everything apart and dry it out in the sun for 2 days before starting over. A week later, somebody stole half her scrap lumber pile overnight. She spent the next 3 days walking further out from the subdivision, hitting loading docks and construction dumpsters just to get back to where she had been before the theft. For the roof, she angled the corrugated metal at a slope so rain and snow would slide off instead of pooling. She sealed the seams with roofing tar she bought for $9 at a hardware store. That was the only thing she actually purchased for the entire build. But the stove was the part that separated Denise from someone just slapping boards together in a vacant lot. She found a 55-gallon steel drum behind an auto shop, cut a door into the front with a borrowed angle grinder, and welded a chimney pipe to the top using a portable welder she bartered 2 days of cleanup work to use. The stove was crude, but it worked. She tested it on a cool October evening, and the interior of the shed hit 80 degrees in under 30 minutes. By November, the shelter was done. It was roughly 8 feet by 10 feet, about the size of a large walk-in closet. It had a plywood door with a latch, a small window cut into the side and covered with a salvaged pane of glass, a raised sleeping platform, and storage shelves made from milk crates stacked along the wall. The shelter was small, but it was solid and warm. From the outside, it looked rough. The boards were mismatched, the roofing was patchy, and the whole thing had a scrapyard quality to it. People driving by on Maple Crescent shook their heads. The Facebook thread had a new round of jokes about it, looking like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. Code enforcement came out one more time in late November. 2 inspectors walked around the structure, took some notes, and left. Because the lot was unzoned and no official building codes applied to temporary structures on vacant private land in that county, there was nothing to cite. Denise was still not breaking any rules. One of the inspectors, a guy named Ray, actually told Denise off the record that the framing was solid. He said he had seen permitted garages with worse construction, but the neighbors did not know that, and they did not care. To them, Denise was still just the homeless woman who had lowered their property values and refused to leave. The worst moment came 3 days after Thanksgiving. A man named Greg, who lived in the beige colonial house at the top of the cul-de-sac, walked down to the lot and confronted Denise directly. He stood at the edge of her build site with his arms crossed over his North Face jacket and told her she was dragging the neighborhood down. He called the shed a pile of garbage. He said he had spoken to an attorney about getting a court order to have it torn down. The whole confrontation was caught on a doorbell camera from the house across the street. In the footage, you can see Denise standing there holding a hammer, not saying a word. Greg talked for nearly 2 minutes straight. When he finally stopped, Denise turned around, picked up a board, and went back to work. She never raised her voice. She never argued. She just kept building. That footage would resurface later, after the storm, and the people who watched it the second time around would see it very differently. December hit the Charlotte area hard, but January was worse. A polar vortex dipped south in early January 2024 and brought the kind of cold that the Carolinas rarely see. Temperatures dropped into the single digits for days at a time. Ice storms knocked out power to over 200,000 homes across the region, and Ridgewood Estates was one of the hardest-hit neighborhoods. The power went out on a Tuesday evening and did not come back for 5 days. Think about what that means in a modern suburban home. The furnace was dead, the water heater was useless, the electric stove was just a cold metal box, and every phone in the neighborhood was dying with no way to charge it. Pipes were freezing and bursting inside the walls, turning finished basements into shallow swimming pools. Families dragged mattresses into living rooms and slept in coats and hats with every blanket in the house piled on top of them. $400,000 homes with smart thermostats and 3-car garages, and the people inside were shivering in the dark. Meanwhile, at the end of the cul-de-sac, smoke was rising steadily from a small metal chimney pipe poking out of a wooden shed. Denise had prepared for exactly this. She had spent November and December stockpiling firewood, cutting fallen branches from the tree line behind the lot, and stacking them in a covered pile beside the shed. She had filled 5-gallon water jugs from the gas station. She had a case of canned beans, a case of canned soup, and a jar of instant coffee. She had a battery-powered lantern and a hand-crank radio. Her barrel stove was burning low and steady, keeping the shed around 70 degrees even while the world outside was a frozen wasteland of ice-covered streets and dark suburban houses. On the second day without power, a woman named Lisa, who lived 3 houses down and had never spoken a single word to Denise, knocked on the shed door. Her 2 children were with her. The youngest was 5. They were all wearing winter coats, but still shaking from the cold. Lisa asked if her kids could warm up inside the shed for a few minutes. Denise opened the door and let all 3 of them in. By day 3, Denise's shed had become an unofficial warming station for Maple Crescent. Neighbors who had never acknowledged her existence were showing up with their children, their elderly parents, even their dogs. Denise made coffee on her barrel stove and heated cans of soup for people who had not eaten a hot meal in 2 days. An elderly man named Earl from 4 doors down came in with his wife, Margaret. Earl had a heart condition, and Margaret was terrified that the cold inside their dark house was going to trigger something serious. Denise gave them the warmest spot near the stove and made them tea using a kettle she had fashioned from a dented pot. They stayed for 3 hours. Earl told Denise she reminded him of his daughter, who was also in the military. Sharon, the same woman who posted the Facebook photo with the laughing emojis, came on day 4. She stood in the doorway of the shed and did not say anything for a long time. Then she sat down on an overturned bucket and warmed her hands near the stove. She never apologized, but she showed up the next day with a bag of groceries from her own freezer, food that was going to spoil anyway, and handed it to Denise without a word. When the power finally came back on day 5, something had shifted on Maple Crescent. The Facebook thread about the eyesore had gone quiet. The petition was never mentioned again. People waved at Denise when they drove past. A few actually stopped to talk. If Denise's story makes you think of a veteran you know who is struggling with the same kind of transition she went through, there is a free resource called The Veteran's Blueprint in the description below. It walks through the exact steps she never had access to, from housing to benefits to building a stable foundation after service. Go grab it! 2 weeks after the storm, a local news crew from a Charlotte television station showed up after someone tipped them off about the story. The segment ran for 4 minutes during the evening broadcast. It showed the shed, it showed the neighborhood, and it showed Denise explaining how she built the whole thing for under $10 in purchased materials, using skills she learned as a combat engineer in the United States Army. The segment went semi-viral on social media. Within a week, a GoFundMe page set up by Lisa, the neighbor who first knocked on the door with her children, raised over $42,000. That was enough for first and last month's rent on a small apartment, furniture, and a used car. But Denise did not just take the money and disappear. She used part of it to get stable housing, and what she did next caught everyone in the neighborhood off guard. She started teaching. She connected with a veterans outreach organization and started running weekend workshops in a church parking lot, teaching basic shelter construction, cold weather survival, and emergency preparedness. Her students were homeless veterans, people just like her who had served their country and come home to nothing. She taught them how to build insulated shelters from scrap materials, how to construct rocket stoves from tin cans, how to purify water in the field, and how to survive when the systems you depend on fail. The workshops were hands-on, the way the Army taught her. Build it, tear it down, build it again until you could do it in the dark. One of her students, a Marine Corps veteran named Andre, built his own micro-shelter on a plot of land donated by a local church. He told the news crew that Denise taught him more in one weekend than he learned in 6 months of bouncing between shelters. Another student, an Army medic named Tanya, who had been sleeping in her van for 4 months, used what Denise taught her to winterize the van so effectively that she stayed warm through the rest of the winter while she saved up for an apartment deposit. Today, Denise Carter is still teaching. She runs her workshops twice a month and has helped over 60 veterans build some form of stable shelter. She still has the barrel stove. She keeps it in her apartment as a reminder. The shed on Maple Crescent is gone now. The lot was eventually sold to a developer who put up a 3-bedroom house that sold for $480,000. Nobody on the street talks about the petition anymore. But when the weather forecast calls for ice storms in the Charlotte area, people on Maple Crescent still think about the winter of 2024. They think about the smoke rising from that chimney pipe. They think about the woman they laughed at, the woman they tried to force out, the woman who opened her door when they had nowhere else to go. And if you take one thing from Denise's story, remember this: the people who laugh at you while you are building are almost always the same people who knock on your door when they need what you built. Your job is to keep building anyway. If this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe. I share stories like this every week about people who got counted out and came back stronger than anyone expected. Click the video on screen now for another one you will not want to miss.